So about 3 weeks ago, I purchased the iPhone 16 Pro with the intention of completely switching over to this phone and keeping it for at least the whole year until the iPhone 17 comes out. However, after using this phone for over 3 weeks now, I have decided to switch back to my 13 Pro. There are many reasons why I'm doing this. I'll talk about that in this video, but if I can summarize my thoughts, I would say this phone just doesn't feel as new and as different as I guess I was expecting it to. There's not that much that is worse on the older phone. So let's talk about everything in detail. Now, I want to start with talking about the price because arguably that is one of the most important things when it comes to buying anything, not just phones. And here we're looking at $500 roughly for the iPhone 13 Pro and around $1,600 for the iPhone 16 Pro, Canadian dollars. So there is approximately a $1,000 difference between these two phones. It is very important to know the price difference between these two phones because if something is better on the 16 Pro and it's not as good on the 13 Pro, you can kind of say, okay, is that thing really worth $1,000 or not? Let's start with the build quality. So the iPhone 16 Pro is obviously the latest and greatest. You have better materials. You have titanium over here, titanium frame, which not only looks better in my opinion, it's matte. It has a matte finish compared to the shiny finish on the 13 Pro, and it's a stainless steel frame on the 13 Pro. And the titanium frame on the 16 Pro is also lighter. So overall, this phone is actually lighter than the 13 Pro, despite it being slightly bigger. And while both phones have ceramic shield glass on the front, on the 16 Pro, it is the second generation. So it is supposed to be a little bit more shadow resistant than this one. However, as far as I know, at least after watching Jerry Rig Everything's video, scratch resistance has stayed the same. That's not any different, which means ideally I would still have to use a screen protector if I don't want this phone to get scratched. And then both phones also have a frosted back glass, which looks nice. Both of them look great. In fact, you could argue that both of these look almost identical. Like if I held this far away, and I told you that this is a 16 Pro, you can't lie, you would probably believe me, right? These look very, very similar. And honestly, at the end of the day, if I'm going to use a case, which I probably will most of the times, then it really doesn't matter what materials this phone has and what this has, right? It's going to get all covered up and most of the protecting work will be done by the case, not the material itself. So to me, this really doesn't matter. Both phones are still IP68 water and dust resistant. However, if you were actually going to use your phone underwater for whatever reason, then this is where buying a new phone is actually worth it, because what you probably should know is that the newer the phone is, the better the water resistance is, because over time all the glue and everything that's holding your phone together tends to get weaker, so it compromises the water resistance. However, the 13 Pro is still water resistant enough that I honestly don't have a problem using this in the rain and it getting wet. Okay, let's talk about the other side of these phones, the screens. Now this is where, I'll be honest, there is a huge difference and it is kind of tempting to switch to this phone just because of the screen. It is really good, especially those bezels. They are super thin, they look really nice. So aesthetically, the 16 Pro wins this by a long shot. However, functionally, there's not much that is different between these two phones' screens. Both have 120 Hz, both have OLED screens, they both look great, great viewing angles, the colors look great, the blacks are actually pure black, and they're just great screens overall. The 16 Pro does get super bright though, goes all the way up to 2000 nits, which is way, way more than the 13 Pro. However, I don't have any problems using this phone outdoors, even directly under sunlight, so to me, this isn't really a big deal. There are also a couple of other things that the 16 Pro has that the 13 Pro doesn't. One of them is the always on display. So, and this is nice actually. It would be kind of sad to not have this anymore, but at the same time, I don't think this is worth $1,000, right? So I think I'm fine with a black screen. Now, just before we talk about the next thing, let me quickly tell you about Squarespace. It's one of the best website building platforms out there. And if you're not using it, you've got to at least check it out. Just type squarespace.com/spixel in your browser and you'll be taken straight to the website where you can make an account completely free. You don't even need your credit card. Literally just pick a template, drag and drop your images, type some text. You can even tell their AI to do it for you. And at that point, you should have a website that's pretty much ready to publish. You can connect your domain if you already have one, or get that from Squarespace as well. In fact, if you are a new customer, you can get 10% off your first purchase if you use my code SPIXEL. So check it out, use the link below. I'm sure you're gonna like it. Okay, let's talk about the performance. One of the things that Apple would like you to believe that is a big deal on the newest and latest and greatest iPhone. And I'm not saying that's not true. I'm sure it is. This phone has the latest and greatest chip from Apple right now. It's the most efficient one. It's super powerful. I'm not denying any of that. However, from my experience of using this phone for the past 3 weeks, honestly, I have not really noticed any difference. First of all, the 13 never felt slow, and this phone doesn't feel faster. The reason why I believe this is true is because doing like everyday tasks like calling, texting, browsing, scrolling on social media, stuff like that, you're not actually pushing the processors inside these phones to their limits. So you don't actually notice a difference. So all that extra power that the processor inside this phone has, you don't actually get to use because even this processor can do it without a problem. That said though, if you are going to play graphically intensive games, then yes, you will be able to utilize that extra power that the 16 Pro has, and you will see better results on this phone compared to this. However, that's not me. I'm not playing heavy graphically intensive games, so this is good enough for me. In terms of software though, the one thing I will for sure be missing out on is Apple Intelligence, when that is available and whenever that will be. Right now, none of these phones have it, so they are exactly the same. Where I think processors inside phones really matter is when it comes to efficiency, because that really impacts your battery life. So let's talk about that. So from my experience, the battery life on the 16 Pro is great. I can usually use this phone for 5, 6 hours, sometimes even 7, and I'll have around 20-30% battery remaining at the end of the day. However, on this phone, I'm usually able to get around 5 hours of screen on time and have maybe 5-10% battery remaining at the end of the day. So this phone also lasts me the entire day, and I don't have to charge it during the day. So for me, again, it's not really a huge problem. But you can't forget about the fact that this phone is 3 years old. So you kind of expect this phone to be better, it lasts longer than this one. And especially the battery health on this phone is at like 87%. So that's a huge variable in there that is not perfect. It's not an apples to apples comparison over here. One thing I do particularly like about the 16 Pro though is that if you go to settings, battery, and then charging, you can choose a specific charge limit. You can set it so that this phone will stop charging when it's at that percent. And this is useful because if you are already planning to buy this phone and you are planning to keep it for a couple of years, maybe 2, 3 or longer, then this is a setting you might want to use because this can slow down the rate at which your battery degrades. Finally, let's talk about the cameras. And I've got to say, this is probably the biggest reason to switch to the 16 Pro if I was to switch to this phone. No doubt the cameras on this phone are really good. You can't deny that. But a lot of those good specs that this phone has in terms of cameras are mainly on paper. If you just look at the photos taken from both phones, you may not see a huge difference. I mean, don't get me wrong, I think the 16 does look better in many situations. I think it's also maybe a little bit more color accurate. It is definitely sharper. It's better in low light. It's better in pretty much every way, but the 13 doesn't look terrible. You could totally use this phone today and be more than happy with the results. But as someone who shoots a lot of video and loves cameras, I really do appreciate some of the things that the 16 Pro has, like that higher megapixel main camera and ultra wide angle camera. Both of these have a 48 megapixel sensor, which is really good. If you use that full resolution, the pictures you can get from this are incredibly high quality. And then being able to take raw photos and then edit them after the fact is just amazing. I love that. And yes, you can still take raw photos on the 13 Pro, but they're just not the same because this phone doesn't have the same hardware that this 16 Pro has. 13 Pro has a 12 megapixel main camera. Even if you're gonna take macro shots, which both of these phones can, they're going to look much better, much sharper on the 16 Pro. This year, Apple also updated photo styles. You have a lot more options and you can actually change the style after taking the photo, which is something you can't do on the 13 Pro. Once you take the photo with one of the photo styles, then it's kind of like baked in. It's permanently there. You can't change it. The selfie camera is also better on the 16 Pro because it has autofocus where this doesn't. And On the video side of things, again, the 16 Pro is a lot better because you can not only shoot in 4K 120, you can shoot in log, which is just amazing. Being able to do that on an iPhone is really cool. It really feels like having a mini cinema camera in your pocket. So this is a very, very powerful phone when it comes to cameras. Honestly, if I do ever decide to buy this phone, maybe sometime later, right now I'm not, but if I do, then cameras will for sure be one of the biggest reasons. But like I said, this phone isn't bad. This still takes really good photos and videos. It's only when you compare it to this phone side by side, then you really start to see some of the drawbacks or some of the shortcomings this phone has. So yeah, the iPhone 16 Pro is an amazing phone. It's great. There's nothing that's, bad about this phone, but there's also nothing that really stands out that's amazing about this phone. So that's why I think, going back to the 13 is a good decision right now, especially considering how much more this phone costs. I just don't see that value over here. So yeah, going back to the 13 now. If you enjoyed watching this video, if you found it helpful, consider subscribing, and I will see you later.